Welcome on in, everyone. It's Malliem back with another weekly horror story. If you've got a story you'd like to share, feel free to post it to my subreddit linked below. Today's story is called It Looked Like Me. If you enjoy the show, hit that sub button for me. It helps a lot. Thanks! I'm going to ask you a bit of a strange question. Have you ever seen yourself? Now, I don't mean looking at your reflection in a mirror or seeing pictures of yourself. I mean to ask, have you honestly seen yourself? You probably haven't, as it's near mathematically impossible. I'm asking this because I need to know. I need to know that I'm not alone in what I experienced. I need to know that someone else has gone through the very same blood-freezing, chest-aching fear that I have. I never did think something like this would happen to me. I vividly recall this happening on a July night about a year and a half ago. It had rained during the day. That, coupled with the increasingly hot weather, made for a miserably muggy night. Not to mention it had fogged up to high hell. If you were outside, you'd be lucky to see more than 5 feet ahead of you. Despite that, it had begun to clear up as the night went on. Sorry, I'm digressing. The night, hot as a tea kettle at the peak of its use, had done much to keep me awake. I decided to sleep without a blanket. There, I lay on my bed, warm, uncomfortable, and breathing as though I'd just come back from a run. I was stuck for a decent position to sleep in. My window had been left open for hours, the screen I left in place serving as a mesh barrier between me and the decidedly uncomfortable outside. I think that window is what allowed me to hear it. Normally, people in my neighborhood go on walks during all times of the day. Doesn't matter what day or time it is, if it's walkable out, someone is going to be walking. So then I didn't find it to be all that surprising when I heard the familiar noise of footsteps outside the window, in the street. My room is located on the second floor, so the sound was a little less pronounced, but it wasn't something I needed to go out of my way to hear. I grabbed my phone from my nightstand and put on some music. At this point, it was 2 a.m, and I was about ready to give an arm and a leg to get some sleep. Even with the loud music blasting, and likely damaging my eardrums, felt like I was cut off from the world, if only temporarily. As it was with most good things in the world, it didn't last. A mere few minutes into my listening, I heard something relatively close to me. If someone had done something in the streets, I, in my current condition, would be unlikely to hear it. But I, as sure as the sun rises, would hear something if it came near my window. And that's just what happened. Rather sharply, a rock smacked against the surface of my window. Of course, it didn't hit the screen, but rather the half of the window that was still glass. I could immediately tell that something was off, so I yanked out my headphones and went up to my window. I wondered just who could be up at this hour, and more importantly, why, of all houses, they'd choose to throw a rock at mine. What I saw when I looked out into the street didn't scare me, per se. No, rather, it weirded me out a little. Someone was walking around in a slight circular motion while humming. I could make them out to be male from the slight glow the streetlight gave off, but I wasn't able to discern much else. Weird, I thought. I moved away from the window and got back into bed. Suddenly, I wasn't feeling so restless anymore. Whatever that person had been doing outside, it had coincided with a sudden and heavy feeling of tiredness that overcame me. I closed my eyes and did my best to try and get to sleep. An undetermined amount of time passed, but it couldn't have been more than half an hour. Whatever dozing off I'd done was quickly and once again, sharply cut off by the sound of another rock slamming into my window. This time, it wasn't a strange sense of curiosity that I felt as I got up and went to the window once more. This time, it was more of a sense of irritation. I could have passed the first time off as being some kind of funny, albeit crass, joke. The second time a rock hit my window, I knew that the person who did it was trying to mess with me. And, well, it worked. I slid the screen window out of its place. As I did so, the rusty metal screeched quietly and made my skin crawl. I poked my head out the window. At this point in time, waking others up and disrupting their sleep wasn't a concern in my mind. My only thought was giving this rock-throwing agitator a piece of my mind. Hey, what the hell are you doing? It's nearly 3 a.m. You got nothing better to be doing? I held off on being more explicit with my words, as I was still curious about why this guy was out here. He didn't reply with words. Instead, it looked as though he threw his head back and began the motion of laughing. But there was no sound. He looked almost like a mime. That, coupled with the light fog in the streets, made for a rather unsettling sight. I wasn't outright terrified in this moment, but I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't a little unnerved. Then, just as fast as the silent laughing came, it waned, and the figure stood stock still once more. Just before I could ask it another question, it began to walk in the direction of my house. I began to back up, my uneasiness quickly rising into a more pronounced fear. That fear quickly dissipated when I realized it was walking up the street in the direction of my house. It just looked as though the man was coming near me. I waited until I couldn't see him anymore, and I retreated from the window, but not before sliding the screen back in place. I winced again as the old metal screeched. I laid back down in bed and closed my eyes again. Soon I found myself dozing off once more. The sounds of the man walking up and down the street were, strangely enough, almost soothing. Wouldn't have been my first pick for sleep ambiance, but it worked, and I found that I was having a much easier time getting to sleep. Some time passed again. I wasn't sure how long it'd been, but I knew that my waking up was no accident. That damn metal screeching wrenched me rather violently out of my short-lived slumber. It took a few seconds to register what was happening as I blinked the sleep and gunk out of my eyes. When it finally clocked, I panicked. Somehow, someone was at my second-floor window, sliding the rusty metal screen to the side. I could only assume it was in an attempt to get into my room. Panicking, I fumbled around the area near my nightstand until my hands found purchase on my lamp. Working my hands up the electrical brass device faster than I could ever remember doing so before, I flicked the light on and turned to face the person who was trying to make their way into my room. I nearly fell back into my nightstand. My panic had grown from a small attack of anxiety in my chest to a full-blown assault of mind-rending fear that cascaded from my brain down into my entire body. The person sliding the screen aside to make his way into my room was me. At least, it looked like me. His face was stretched into an eerie smile, and his head was shaking. Remembering what I'd seen him do before, it looked as though he was doing the exact same laughing motion. I made the connection that this had to have been the man who threw rocks at my window. I wondered why he'd thrown the rocks, and more importantly, I wondered just why he looked like me. He reached inside and gripped the window frame with an arm that looked just a little too long. He was making his way into my room. I had to think quick. I didn't know what would happen if he did manage to get in, and I really didn't want to find out. Looking around, my eyes once more settled on the nightstand. Right next to my lamp was the hunting knife my brother had gifted me for my birthday a few years earlier. I grabbed the blade, removed it from the leather case, and I turned back around to see that the man had now gotten a leg into the room. I was afraid that he might do something when I was using the knife, but it couldn't have been worse at what he may have been planning to do when he was fully inside. Stealing my nerves, I rushed forward and began to stab furiously at the head of the thing that looked just like me. I stabbed it over and over and over again. I kept stabbing it until the sounds of the blade sloshing against wet, shredded flesh bone and brain were the only ones I heard. I retracted the knife and threw it across my room before pushing the thing out of the window and slamming it shut. There, in front of the window, I stood. My breath came heavy and labored. My hands were shaking and I had splatters of a strange, black blood on my clothing and face. But I was okay. Whatever that thing was, I'd gotten it. Hopefully. Soon after that, the adrenaline wore off, and I found myself to be more tired than I felt all night. I tore off my dirty shirt and collapsed into bed. Sleep came to me quicker that time than it had any other that night. And this time, I wasn't awoken by any outside noise. The next day, I took it upon myself to investigate the area outside of my window. I found two things of interest. On the outside walls of the house, leading up to my window, were muddy scuff marks. That settled it for me. The thing had to have climbed up the wall. Somehow, that was the less terrifying of the two discoveries. The second one, I discovered simply by looking down. In the shrubbery surrounding my house, there was that same black blood. Accompanying it this time, however, was what looked like a large mass of flesh. I covered it up with more shrubs and decided to let nature take its course. I never told my parents. They would have thought me crazy, and I wasn't looking to deal with that kind of pressure. Not after what had happened to me that night. That was 1.5 years ago. Since then, I haven't seen anything like what attempted to come into my room that night. I still have questions. What was it? Why did it want to come into my room? Chief among those questions was the one regarding me. Just why did it look like me? That's the most unnerving part. Something that looked like me tried to come into my room for who knows what reason. It failed, but that doesn't change the intent. I don't think I'll ever know the cause of anything that happened that night, and I just have to be okay with that. It's not like I have any other choice anyways. Still, I'm left thinking about one last question and a word of advice. Have you ever seen yourself? I don't mean to ask if you looked in a mirror or at a photo. I mean to ask, have you ever seen someone that looks exactly like you? If the answer is anything but a resounding no, then there's only one piece of advice I can give you. Watch out if you do.